1. Roses. It was a cold November storm, and everything looked forlorn. Even the pert sparrows were draggle-tailed and too much out of spirits to fight for crumbs with the fat pigeons who tripped through the mud with their little red boots as if in haste to get back to their cozy home in the dovecot. But the most forlorn creature out that day was a small errand girl, with a bonnet box on each arm, and both hands struggling to hold a big, broken umbrella. A pair of worn-out boots let in the wet upon her tired feet. A thin cotton dress and an old shawl poorly protected her from the storm, and a faded hood covered her head. The face that looked out from this hood was too pale and anxious for one so young, and when a sudden gust turned the old umbrella inside out with a crash, despair fell upon poor Lizzie, and she was so miserable she could have sat down in the rain and cried. But there was no time for tears. So, dragging the dilapidated umbrella along, she spread her shawl over the bonnet boxes and hurried down the broad street, eager to hide her misfortunes from a pretty young girl who stood at a window laughing at her. She could not find the number of the house where one of the fine hats was to be left, and after hunting all down one side of the street, she crossed over and came at last to the very house where the pretty girl lived. She was no longer to be seen, and, with a sigh of relief, Lizzie rang the bell and was told to wait in the hall while Miss Bell tried the hat on. Glad to rest, she warmed her feet, righted her umbrella, and then sat looking about her with eyes quick to see the beauty and the comfort that made the place so homelike and delightful. A small waiting room opened from the hall, and in it stood many blooming plants, whose fragrance attracted Lizzie as irresistibly as if she had been a butterfly or bee. Slipping in, she stood enjoying the lovely colors, sweet odors, and delicate shapes of these household spirits. For Lizzie loved flowers passionately, and just then they possessed a peculiar charm for her. One particularly captivating little rose won her heart, and made her long for it with a longing that became a temptation too strong to resist. It was so perfect, so like a rosy face, smiling out from the green leaves that Lizzie could not keep her hands off it, and having smelt, touched, and kissed it, she suddenly broke the stem and hid it in her pocket. Then, frightened at what she had done, she crept back to her place in the hall and sat there, burdened with remorse. A servant came just then to lead her upstairs, for Miss Bell wished the hat altered and must give directions. With her heart in a flutter and pinker roses in her cheeks than the one in her pocket, Lizzie followed to a handsome room where a pretty girl stood before a long mirror with the hat in her hand. "Tell Madame Tiffany that I don't like it at all, for she hasn't put in the blue plume Mama ordered, and I won't have rosebuds, they are so common," said the young lady in a dissatisfied tone as she twirled the hat about. "Yes, miss," was all Lizzie could say, for she considered that hat the loveliest thing a girl could possibly own. "You had better ask your mamma about it, Miss Bell, before you give any orders. She will be up in a few moments, and the girl can wait," put in a maid, who was sewing in the anteroom. "I suppose I must, but I won't have roses," answered Belle crossly. Then she glanced at Lizzie and said more gently, "You look very cold. Come and sit by the fire while you wait." "I'm afraid I'll wet the pretty rug, miss. My feet are sopping," said Lizzie gratefully but timidly. "So they are. Why didn't you wear rubber boots?" "I haven't got any." "I'll give you mine then, for I hate them, and as I never go out in wet weather, they are of no earthly use to me. Marie, bring them here. I shall be glad to get rid of them, and I'm sure they'll be useful to you." "Oh, thank you, miss. I'd like 'em ever so much, for I'm out in the rain half the time and get bad colds because my boots are old," said Lizzie, smiling brightly at the thought of the welcome gift. "I should think your mother would get you warmer things," began Belle, who found something rather interesting in the shabby girl, with shy bright eyes and curly hair bursting out of the old hood. "I haven't got any, mother," said Lizzie with a pathetic glance at her poor clothes. "I'm so sorry. Have you brothers and sisters?" asked Belle, hoping to find something pleasant to talk about, for she was a kind little soul. "No, miss, I've got no folks at all." "Oh dear, how sad. Why, who takes care of you?" cried Belle, looking quite distressed. "No one. I take care of myself. I work for Madame and she pays me $1 a week. I stay with Mrs. Brown and chore round to pay for my keep," My dollar don't get many clothes, so I can't be as neat as I'd like." And the forlorn look came back to poor Lizzie's face. Belle said nothing, but sat among the sofa cushions where she had thrown herself, looking soberly at this other girl, no older than she was, who took care of herself and was all alone in the world. It was a new idea to Belle, who was loved and petted as an only child is apt to be. She often saw beggars and pitied them, but knew very little about their wants and lives, so it was like turning a new page in her happy life to be brought so near to poverty as this chance meeting with the milliner's girl. "Aren't you afraid and lonely and unhappy?" she said slowly, trying to understand and put herself in Lizzie's place. "Yes, but it's no use. I can't help it, and maybe things will get better by, and I'll have my wish," answered Lizzie more hopefully, because Belle's pity warmed her heart and made her troubles seem lighter. "What is your wish?" asked Belle, hoping Mama wouldn't come just yet, for she was getting interested in the stranger. "To have a nice little room, and make flowers, like a French girl I know. It's such pretty work, and she gets lots of money, for everyone likes her flowers. She shows me how sometimes, and I can do leaves first rate, but there." Lizzie stopped suddenly, and the color rushed up to her forehead, for she remembered the little rose in her pocket, and it weighed upon her conscience like a stone. Before Belle could ask what was the matter, Marie came in with a tray of cake and fruit, saying, "Here's your lunch, Miss Belle. Put it down, please. I'm not ready for it yet." And Belle shook her head as she glanced at Lizzie, who was staring hard at the fire with such a troubled face that Belle could not bear to see it. Jumping out of her nest of cushions, she heaped a plate with good things, and going to Lizzie, offered it, saying, with a gentle courtesy that made the act doubly sweet, "Please have some. You must be tired of waiting." But Lizzie could not take it. She could only cover her face and cry, for this kindness rent her heart and made the stolen flower a burden too heavy to be borne. "Oh, don't cry so. Are you sick? Have I been rude? Tell me all about it, and if I can't do anything, Mama can," said Belle, surprised and troubled. "No, I'm not sick. I'm bad, and I can't bear it when you are so good to me," sobbed Lizzie, quite overcome with penitence, and taking out the crumpled rose, she confessed her fault with many tears. "Don't feel so much about such a little thing as that," began Belle warmly, then checked herself and added more soberly, "It was wrong to take it without leave, but it's all right now, and I'll give you as many roses as you want, for I know you are a good girl." "Thank you. I didn't want it only because it was pretty, but I wanted to copy it. I can't get any for myself, and so I can't do my make-believe ones well. Madame won't even lend me the old ones in the store, and Estelle has none to spare for me, because I can't pay her for teaching me. She gives me bits of muslin and wire and things, and shows me now and then. But I know if I had a real flower I could copy it, so she'd see I did know something, for I try real hard. I'm so tired of slopping round the streets, I'd do anything to earn my living some other way." Lizzie had poured out her trouble rapidly, and the little story was quite affecting when one saw the tears on her cheeks, the poor clothes, and the thin hands that held the stolen rose. Belle was much touched, and in her impetuous way, set about mending matters as fast as possible. "Put on those boots and that pair of dry stockings right away. Then tuck as much cake and fruit into your pocket as it will hold. I'm going to get you some flowers, and see if Mama is too busy to attend to me." With a nod and a smile, Belle flew about the room a minute, then vanished, leaving Lizzie to her comfortable task, feeling as if fairies still haunted the world as in the good old times. When Belle came back with a handful of roses, she found Lizzie absorbed in admiring contemplation of her new boots, as she ate sponge cake in a blissful sort of waking dream. "Mama can't come, but I don't care about the hat. It will do very well and isn't worth fussing about. There, will those be of any use to you?" And she offered the nosegay with a much happier face than the one Lizzie first saw. "Oh, miss, they're just lovely. I'll copy that pink rose as soon as ever I can, and when I've learned how to do 'em tip-top, I'd like to bring you some if you don't mind," answered Lizzie, smiling all over her face as she buried her nose luxuriously in the fragrant mass. "I'd like it very much, for I should think you'd have to be very clever to make such pretty things. I really quite fancy those rosebuds in my hat. Now I know that you're going to learn how to make them. Put an orange in your pocket, and the flowers in water as soon as you can, so they'll be fresh when you want them. Goodbye. Bring home our hats every time and tell me how you get on." With kind words like these, Belle dismissed Lizzie, who ran downstairs, feeling as rich as if she had found a fortune. Away to the next place she hurried, anxious to get her errands done and the precious posy safely into fresh water. But Mrs. Turretvile was not at home, and the bonnet could not be left till paid for. So Lizzie turned to go down the high steps, glad that she need not wait. She stopped one instant to take a delicious sniff at her flowers, and that was the last happy moment that poor Lizzie knew for many weary months. The new boots were large for her, the steps slippery with sleet, and down went the little errand girl from top to bottom till she landed in the gutter directly upon Mrs. Turretville's costly bonnet. "I've saved my posies anyway," sighed Lizzie, as she picked herself up, bruised, wet, and faint with pain. "But, oh my heart, won't Madame scold when she sees that bandbox smashed flat?" groaned the poor child, sitting on the curbstone to get her breath and view the disaster. The rain poured, the wind blew, the sparrows on the park railing chirped derisively, and no one came along to help Lizzie out of her troubles. Slowly she gathered up her burdens. Painfully she limped away in the big boots, and the last the naughty sparrows saw of her was a shabby little figure going round the corner, with a pale, tearful face held lovingly over the bright bouquet that was her one treasure and her only comfort in the moment which brought to her the great misfortune of her life. 2. Forget-me-nots. "Oh, Mama, I am so relieved that the box has come at last. If it had not, I do believe I should have died of disappointment," cried pretty Belle 5 years later on the morning before her 18th birthday. "It would have been a serious disappointment, darling, for I had sought my heart on your wearing my gift tomorrow night, and when the steamers kept coming in without my trunk from Paris, I was very anxious. I hope you will like it." "Dear Mama, I know I shall like it. Your taste is so good and you know what suits me so well." "Make haste, Marie. I'm dying to see it," said Belle, dancing about the great trunk, as the maid carefully unfolded tissue papers and muslin wrappers. A young girl's first ball dress is a grand affair, in her eyes at least, and Belle soon stopped dancing to stand with clasped hands, eager eyes and parted lips before the snowy pile of illusion that was at last daintily lifted out upon the bed. Then, as Marie displayed its loveliness, little cries of delight were heard, and when the whole delicate dress was arranged to the best effect, she threw herself upon her mother's neck and actually cried with pleasure. "Mama, it is too lovely. I and you are very kind to do so much for me. How shall I ever thank you?" "By putting it right on to see if it fits, and when you wear it look your happiest, that I may be proud of my pretty daughter." Mama got no further, for Marie uttered a French shriek, wrung her hands, and then began to burrow wildly in the trunk and among the papers, crying distractedly, "Great heavens, Madame! The wreath has been forgotten. What an affliction! Mademoiselle's enchanting toilette is destroyed without the wreath, and nowhere do I find it." In vain they searched. In vain Marie wailed, and Belle declared it must be somewhere. No wreath appeared. It was duly set down in the bill, and a fine sum charged for a headdress to match the dainty forget-me-nots that looped the fleecy skirts and ornamented the bosom of the dress. It had evidently been forgotten, and Mama dispatched Marie at once to try and match the flowers, for Belle would not hear of any other decoration for her beautiful blonde hair. The dress fitted to a charm, and was pronounced by all beholders the loveliest thing ever seen. Nothing was wanted but the wreath to make it quite perfect, and when Marie returned, after a long search, with no forget-me-nots, Belle was in despair. "Wear natural ones," suggested a sympathizing friend. But another hunt among greenhouses was as fruitless as that among the milliners' rooms. No forget-me-nots could be found, and Marie fell exhausted into a chair, desolated at what she felt to be an awful calamity. "Let me have the carriage, and I'll ransack the city till I find some," cried Belle, growing more resolute with each failure. Marnma was deep in preparations for the ball, and could not help her afflicted daughter. though she was much disappointed at the mishap. So Belle drove off, resolved to have her flowers whether there were any or not. Anyone who has ever tried to match a ribbon, find a certain fabric, or get anything done in a hurry knows what a wearisome task it sometimes is, and can imagine Belle's state of mind after repeated disappointments. She was about to give up in despair when someone suggested that perhaps the Frenchwoman, Estelle Valnor, might make the desired wreath, if there was time. Away drove Belle, and, on entering the room, gave a sigh of satisfaction, for a whole box full of the loveliest forget-me-nots stood upon the table. As fast as possible she told her tale and demanded the flowers, no matter what the price might be. Imagine her feelings when the Frenchwoman, with a shrug, announced that it was impossible to give Mademoiselle a single spray. All were engaged to trim a bridesmaid's dress and must be sent away at once. It really was too bad, and Belle lost her temper entirely, for no persuasion or bribes would win a spray from Estelle. The provoking part of it was that the wedding would not come off for several days, and there was time enough to make more flowers for that dress, since Belle only wanted a few for her hair. Neither would Estelle make her any, as her hands were full, and so small an order was not worth deranging one's self for. But observing Belle's sorrowful face, she said affably, "Mademoiselle may, perhaps, find the flowers she desires at Miss Burton's. She has been helping me with these garlands, and may have some left. Here is her address." Belle took the card with thanks and hurried away with a last hope faintly stirring in her girlish heart, for Belle had an unusually ardent wish to look her best at this party, since somebody was to be there, and somebody considered forget-me-nots the sweetest flowers in the world. Mamma knew this, and the kiss Belle gave her when the dress came had a more tender meaning than gratified vanity or daughterly love. Up many stairs she climbed and came at last to a little room, very poor but very neat, where at the one window sat a young girl with crutches by her side and her lap full of flower leaves and petals. She rose slowly as Belle came in, and then stood looking at her, with such a wistful expression in her shy, bright eyes that Belle's anxious face cleared involuntarily, and her voice lost its impatient tone. As she spoke, she glanced about the room, hoping to see some blue blossoms awaiting her. But none appeared, and she was about to despond again, when the girl said gently, "I have none by me now, but I may be able to find you some." "Thank you very much, but I have been everywhere in vain. Still, if you do get any, please send them to me as soon as possible. Here is my card." Miss Burton glanced at it, then cast a quick look at the sweet, anxious face before her, and smiled so brightly that Belle smiled also, and asked wonderingly, "What is it? What do you see?" "I see the dear young lady who was so kind to me long ago. You don't remember me, and never knew my name, but I never have forgotten you all these years. I always hoped I could do something to show how grateful I was, and now I can, for you shall have your flowers if I sit up all night to make them." But Belle still shook her head and watched the smiling face before her with wondering eyes, till the girl added, with sudden color in her cheeks, "Ah, you've done so many kind things in your life. You don't remember the little errand girl from Madame Tiffany's who stole a rose in your hall, and how you gave her rubber boots and cake and flowers, and were so good to her she couldn't forget it if she lived to be 100. "But you are so changed," began Belle, who did faintly recollect that little incident in her happy life. "Yes, I had a fall and hurt myself so that I shall always be lame." And Lizzie went on to tell how Madame had dismissed her in a rage, how she lay ill till Mrs. Brown sent her to the hospital, and how for a year she had suffered much alone in that great house of pain before one of the kind visitors had befriended her. While hearing the story of the 5 years that had been so full of pleasure, ease, and love for herself, Belle forgot her errand, and sitting beside Lizzie, listened with pitying eyes to all she told of her endeavors to support herself by the delicate handiwork she loved. "I'm very happy now," ended Lizzie, looking about the little bare room with a face full of the sweetest content. "I get nearly work enough to pay my way, and Estelle sends me some when she has more than she can do. I've learned to do it nicely, and it is so pleasant to sit here and make flowers instead of trudging about in the wet with other people's hats. Though I do sometimes wish I was able to trudge One gets on so slowly with crutches." A little sigh followed the words, and Belle put her own plump hand on the delicate one that held the crutch, saying, in her cordial young voice, "I'll come and take you to drive sometimes, for you are too pale, and you'll get ill sitting here at work day after day. Please let me. I'd love to, for I feel so idle and wicked when I see busy people like you that I reproach myself for neglecting my duty and having more than my share of happiness." Lizzie thanked her with a look, and then said in a tone of interest that was delightful to hear, "Tell about the wreath you want. I should so love to do it for you if I can." Belle had forgotten all about it in listening to this sad little story of a girl's life. Now she felt half ashamed to talk of so frivolous a matter till she remembered that it would help Lizzie, and, resolving to pay for it as never garland was paid for before, she entered upon the subject with renewed interest. "You shall have the flowers in time for your ball tomorrow night. I will engage to make a wreath that will please you, only it may take longer than I think. Don't be troubled if I don't send it till evening. It will surely come in time. I can work fast, and this will be the happiest job I ever did," said Lizzie, beginning to lay out mysterious little tools and bend delicate wires. "You are altogether too grateful for the little I have done. It makes me feel ashamed to think I did not find you out before and do something better worth thanks." "Ah, it wasn't the boots or the cake or the roses, dear Miss Belle. It was the kind looks, the gentle words, the way it was done, that went right to my heart and did me more good than 1,000,000 of money. I never stole a pin after that day, for the little rose wouldn't let me forget how you forgave me so sweetly. I sometimes think it kept me from greater temptations, for I was a poor, forlorn child with no one to keep me good." Pretty Belle looked prettier than ever as she listened, and a bright tear stood in either eye like a drop of dew on a blue flower. It touched her very much to learn that her little act of childish charity had been so sweet and helpful to this lonely girl, and now lived so freshly in her grateful memory. It showed her, suddenly, how precious little deeds of love and sympathy are, how strong to bless, how easy to perform, how comfortable to recall. Her heart was very full and tender just then, and the lesson sunk deep into it, never to be forgotten. She sat a long time watching flowers bud and blossom under Lizzie's skillful fingers, and then hurried home to tell all her glad news to Mama. If the next day had not been full of most delightfully exciting events, Belle might have felt some anxiety about her wreath, for hour after hour went by, and nothing arrived from Lizzie. Evening came, and all was ready. Belle was dressed, and looked so lovely that Mama declared she needed nothing more, but Marie insisted that the grand effect would be ruined without the garland among the sunshiny hair. Belle had time now to be anxious, and waited with growing impatience for the finishing touch to her charming toilette. "I must be downstairs to receive, and can't wait another moment, so put in the blue pompon and let me go," she said at last, with a sigh of disappointment, for the desire to look beautiful that night in somebody's eyes had increased fourfold. With a tragic gesture, Marie was about to adjust the pompon when the quick tap of a crutch came down the hall, and Lizzie hurried in, flushed and breathless, but smiling happily as she uncovered the box she carried, with a look of proud satisfaction. A general "ah" of admiration arose as Belle, Mama, and Marie surveyed the lovely wreath that lay before them, and when it was carefully arranged on the bright head that was to wear it, Belle blushed with pleasure. Mama said, "It is more beautiful than any Paris could have sent us." And Marie clasped her hands theatrically, sighing, with her head on one side. "Truly, yes, Mademoiselle is now adorable. I am so glad you like it. I did my very best and worked all night, but I had to beg one spray from Estelle, or with all my haste, I could not have finished in time," said Lizzie, refreshing her weary eyes with a long affectionate gaze at the pretty figure before her. A fold of the airy skirt was caught on one of the blue clusters, and Lizzie knelt down to arrange it as she spoke. Belle leaned toward her and said softly, "Money alone can't pay you for this kindness, so tell me how I can best serve you. This is the happiest night of my life, and I want to make everyone feel glad also." "Then don't talk of paying me, but promise that I may make the flowers you wear on your wedding day," whispered Lizzie, kissing the kind hand held out to help her rise. For on it she saw a brilliant ring, and in the blooming, blushing face bent over her, she read the tender little story that somebody had told Belle that day. "So you shall, and I'll keep this wreath all my life for your sake, dear," answered Belle, as her full heart bubbled over with pitying affection for the poor girl who would never make a bridal garland for herself. Belle kept her word, even when she was in a happy home of her own, for out of the dead roses bloomed a friendship that brightened Lizzie's life, and long after the blue garland was faded, Belle remembered the helpful little lesson that taught her to read the faces poverty touches with a pathetic eloquence, which says to those who look, "Forget me not."